The Protestant Reformation began as a purely religious movement. By posting his 95 Theses on the door of the All Saints Church in Wittenberg, Saxony, Martin Luther sought to rid the Catholic Church of corruption, most notably the practice of receiving indulgences. Although Luther hoped to influence change from within the Church, he was excommunicated in 1521. Luther's support of the lower class and decreasing church power were popular and allowed Protestantism to spread throughout Northern Europe. The spread of Protestantism had a major effect on German political structure. Before the Reformation, Germany was merely a group of principalities brought together under the rule of the Holy Roman Emperor. As the Reformation occurred, many German principalities became Protestant, thus separating themselves away from the Holy Roman Empire and ruling themselves independently. The Protestant Reformation also had lasting effects on the English political landscape. Influenced by German conversion to Lutheranism, King Henry VIII created the Church of England after he was not granted permission from the Pope to divorce his then-wife, Catherine of Aragon. The conversion to Protestantism proved only to be a symbolic gesture, as most Catholic practices were retained in the Church of England. The Church of England, however, recognized King Henry VIII as the supreme leader of the Church on earth, thus decreasing the Pope's power. Major political change would not occur in England until 1553, when Mary I, a Catholic, was poised to gain control of the crown. After 5 years of political instability and widespread riots, Mary's sister Elizabeth succeeded her in 1558 and brought Protestantism back to England. Perhaps the most famous example of Protestant Reformation-influenced change was the 30 Years' War. Beginning in 1618 and lasting until 1648, this war was fought between Catholics and Protestants and involved almost all major European nations. The war saw losses of power from both the Catholic Church and the Habsburg rule. The 30 Years' War also resulted in the establishment of nation-states, as well as an early concept of the balance of power in Europe. These are just some examples of how the Protestant Reformation, although purely religious at first, evolved into a political movement.
In origin, the Protestant and Counter-Reformations were deeply religious movements based in the problems of the Church. However, without separation of church and state, the movements were also inherently political in nature and thus fundamentally affected the balance of power within Europe between governmental and spiritual forces. In comparison, the Counter-Reformation was equally if not more political in nature than the Protestant. Its tenets were not only influenced by long-held frustrations within the Church, but also by the armed and cultural threat of Protestantism in Germany and Spain. Thus, the papacy and his subjects undertook measures in order to weaken the breakaway faith, leading to the 30 Years' War and destruction of Germany. First, the Council of Trent met in 1545 in order to outline the heresies committed by the Protestants in the eyes of the Catholic Church. In effect, this gave Catholic states a casus belli against both nations and followers of the other faith. Even the spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola begin with the phrase, to have the true sentiment which we ought to have in this church militant, exposing the Church's true intent to completely stamp out Protestantism wherever it may be. On the heels of the council came waves of inquisition throughout Europe, particularly in Spain and the Papal territories. Using brute force and intimidation to meet their ends, the Inquisition acted as the first method of suppression against the Protestant faiths. Despite existing under the guise of faith and glory to God, the Inquisition was abused by the Habsburg family as an instrument of political control. A similar hostility arose in areas like the Holy Roman Empire and the Low Countries. However, the might of the Inquisition was unable to vanquish the growing Calvinist presence in Holland, leading to the independent sentiment in Bavaria and later the 30 Years' War. The war was a culmination of the two reform movements and their ideals. However, this time the belligerents shed their veil of Christianity to reveal the face of power underneath. The conflict was fought largely without religious cooperation. The Catholic French sided with the Anglican English, the Lutheran Swedes with the Republican Dutch, the Holy Roman Empire with the religiously tolerant Poles. With the devastation of what can be called the First Global War, A new age of thought was born from the ashes of politically motivated strife.